Welcome, Jodi Orgill Brown, to the podcast. I'm excited to talk with you today. For those that haven't had a chance to read anything that you've written or had a chance to listen to you speak, go ahead and introduce a little bit about yourself in what you're currently dealing with, what you're currently working towards and experiencing, and then we'll go back.
There's a few books right there in that. I am currently, what I would say is I am a nonprofit consultant, and I am a speaker, and I am an author. Right now I'm at 4 books and working on a few at the moment. My physical struggles have been a very big part of my life the last several years.
Yeah.
I had a brain tumor, which was from the end of my ear canal and then wrapping around my brainstem. And in the process of trying to remove that tumor, I had quite a bit of nerve damage that was done. And I now have facial paralysis and hearing loss and some complications with being able to chew and swallow and use my eye.
Yeah.
And so we are currently going to find surgeons who can help minimize the effects of the facial paralysis. So in just a couple of weeks, I'm flying to the Facial Paralysis Institute in Southern California and doing nerve grafts.
That's exciting and scary.
Oh, yes. They're going to take some nerves from my ankles, from each of my ankles, and implant them into my face.
Yeah.
And we're going to see if we can get some nerves that are innervated and working. And then a following procedure after those nerves have had the chance to recover after they're connected. We will then do what's called a gracilis implant, and they'll take a muscle from my leg and put it in my cheek and try and get it to communicate with my nerve and see if the nerve has enough power to actually give me some facial movement again.
What were the symptoms that led to that? I mean, at first, it's probably something like a headache or something, and people often wonder, is this bad? How bad is this? What is this? Is it migraines? What's going on? And that's probably like the worst prognosis that you'd have.
I think we can't help but wonder what we would have been like in that certain situation when we hear people's stories. And that's one of the questions I get asked the most often is, how did you know? When should I be worried? If something is going on, how do I know when it's everyday and normal versus when it's not? And I can't give you a defined answer to that because it is different with every person.
Sure.
And especially with tumors, it depends on the part of your brain where the tumor is located, because it can impact all different aspects of your physiology according to where the tumor is.
Depending on the brain.
Yes, depending on the location. So in my case, it started with dizzy spells. I was having a difficult time trying to just focus because it felt like I was always spinning, and I had to constantly look at my feet as I was walking. Otherwise, I felt like I would get off balance. So the balance thing was part of it. And then I started getting terrible headaches. And for me, that was not normal. Some people experience headaches all their lives.
Yeah.
That was not normal for me. And so it was a new thing. And I went to the doctor for that. I went to the doctor for dizzy spells. And at the time, I went with just that symptom in mind. Then I returned a few months later, just with headaches as the symptoms. And then my ears started having ringing in the ears, and I started having spells of more vertigo than dizzy spells. The difference being the dizzy spells, I felt like I was the one that was kind of off balance. Vertigo, when my eyes were open, it looked like the room was actually spinning around me.
Yeah.
And so one by one, I visited the doctor for each of these symptoms, but I never made the connection that they were part of something bigger until I had gone to the doctor several times, and it had been over the course of many, many months.
Yeah.
And I was
not
getting
putting them together.
Progressively worse.
Yeah. Eventually, it's bad enough, it's severe enough that you're talking to the same doctor, or they've advanced you on to a specialist?
I was still with the same doctor. And again, we had just been looking for one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Why were you dizzy? Why are you having headaches? And every time the answers seemed legitimate to me. I was young, I was healthy, but I had 4 children. I was working full time. I was very into volunteer work. So the prognosis of your body is stressed, you probably are having migraines, chronic migraines,
anxiety, lots of potential.
Anxiety, all of these things, all of that sounded perfectly legitimate to me. And so we tried to treat these symptoms individually at the time. So it was over the course of probably 7 to 8 months before I really got to the point where I was bad enough and all of these symptoms were piling on top of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband came home from work one day and he said, "How are you today?" And I could not lie. I said, "I am not good. I'm not good." And he looked at me and said with more vehemence in his voice than I had probably ever heard from him. He said, "Jodi, something is wrong with you and we have to figure out what it is." And part of me initially was a little bit nervous by that tone in his voice.
Right.
But it was also a signal that if he really thinks that this is that important, then I need to feel the same way.
Yeah. I've had a couple of conversations recently with people about their spouses on this same kind of track where we know who we've connected with and who we've lived with for however long we've been married, and we know their mannerisms and we know who they are. And when something changes in how they're behaving towards us, not necessarily because of us, but something like that, we know that they're serious. For example, my wife is very timid, but if it has anything to do with her kids or me, she just turns on to Mama Bear. Like it's the stereotype.
Goes out the window and she's going to stand her ground.
So I know exactly how that feels. Like, oh no, this is serious. There is something going on because they've never behaved like this before.
And there's part of me that probably needed to hear that because it was validation that someone else could see the struggles I was having because they were all, quote unquote, in my head.
Yeah.
No one could see that I was dizzy. No one could see that I was having headaches. And unless I chose to tell people, which I didn't at that time.
Right. Nobody wants to hear a whiner.
No one knew what was going on. And so I was trying to pretend like everything was normal. But behind closed doors, I felt like I was falling apart.
Yeah.
And so I did go back to the doctor. And when they called me and said, "Your blood test came back fine, everything looks good," I knew at that point in time, everything is not good.
Yeah.
And we have to keep looking for an answer.
Something else is wrong.
And so I pursued and I pushed and I told the nurse, "Ask the doctor, what's the next stage?
Yeah.
I'm not okay. We have to keep looking for solutions." And the next stage was an MRI of my brain.
Yeah.
And as soon as we saw the MRI of my brain, there were all of the answers.
A little bit of relief and a little bit of, oh no, what?
Yes. My initial thought was actually, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I knew that something was wrong. I knew that there was a cause for this. Now we can fix it and I can go on with my life. I didn't realize how much more was going to be involved. I thought of it as something that we would be able to identify, eliminate, and go back to normal. I didn't know at the time that it was going to be a game changer and a life changer.
Yeah. As this is happening, it's totally changing life. 4 kids, job. A lot of that has to just go, right? With what you have to do to take care of yourself physically to solve this problem, to continue with life. So that has led you to the path that you're on now, having written some books, in the process of writing books, speaking. What is your message that you are asked to speak about?
There are a few messages I'm asked to share. I'm always asked to share aspects of my story because I've learned so many lessons along the way.
Yeah.
Number one is that you are not your physical self.
Yeah.
I am not my face. I am much more than what my face appears to be to other people.
Yeah.
Just if you had a broken arm, I wouldn't judge your broken arm to represent who you are as a person. The same is true of me or others who have physical disabilities or disfigurement. You wouldn't judge them. You wouldn't judge someone that had been in an accident or had gotten injured. So why do we judge someone because they have short legs or a certain color of hair or a color of skin or something we deem to be abnormal with their appearance? I have a facial therapist. Many people don't know there was such a thing. I didn't know before this. And she told me that Your face is the one part of a daily uniform that you wear all of the time. It's the one thing you can't change. You can change your clothes. You can cover up all parts of your body that you don't want to be seen, but you can't really cover up your face.
Yeah.
Although these days we're finding that masks can cover up part of it.
Yeah. And I'm nervous to meet a bunch of students and not really see who they are.
And not really be able to know who they are behind the masks because you can't get the same feeling for them, and you can't communicate in the same way, and you can't identify them in the same way. But I appreciated that she shared that with me because it ranks as one of the highest traumas that you can experience.
Yeah.
Higher than AIDS or death of a loved one. When you have disfigurement or trauma that involves your face, it is very, very intensely personal because that is the person that you represent yourself to the world all of the time. So especially when you have a change. If you were born that way, there are people who still undergo quite a bit of trauma. But when you've had a change that takes you from being what the world deems normal,
how you remember yourself,
to looking in the mirror and not recognizing the person you see or realizing that that person is significantly changed, that can be a very, very traumatic thing. So I do talk a lot about that we are not our physical bodies, that we are, that we should be more authentic and vulnerable with each other, because it's when we allow each other to see who we are on the inside that we really come to love and trust one another.
Yeah.
And in the process of all of that, when we have interactions with other people, from the very small momentary interactions to those on a much larger scale, the way we treat other people and the way we choose to see other people and how we choose to act when we interact with them are literally can be life-changing and life-saving moments.
Yeah.
And it's a lot based on what we choose to see. Do you choose to see me as someone who is disfigured or disabled or looks like they had a stroke or Bell's palsy? Or do you choose to see me as a whole person, but maybe one who is hurting?
And that's a lesson. Just an experience came to mind. We were at Lagoon and my kids saw someone who looked different. And I can't remember what the situation was, if it was a shorter person or something, but my kids said something and kind of loud enough for that person to hear. And it was one of those, that's not how we want to treat people. And even though we know better, right? In our heads, we know better. We still have that reaction, even if we don't say something. And the pressure of trying to teach your kids that is a little bit heavy. And I hope that as we meet more people around the world, especially as technology is making it possible to meet other people on a much bigger scale, that we can take that into account, that we can say, I need to figure out who this person is before I make any kind of judgment as to who they are, what they're going through.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is something that I think needs to be addressed more. I think parents and some adults have the natural reaction, and maybe not natural because it's not natural. As kids, we don't have this reaction, but as adults, we think, oh, they have something different. I shouldn't bring it up.
Right.
I should be able to see past that.
Yeah.
As kids, we don't see past that. What we see is what we see. We see what's in front of us.
We're okay saying something.
And we're okay saying something about it. And I guarantee when your children said something, that wasn't the first time that the individual had heard that. It's something that that person already knows. Yeah. And your children were just stating the obvious. And I think sometimes when parents try to shush or quiet a child, it almost makes the situation worse.
Yeah.
So when I see a situation like that, I actually encourage the kids, go ahead, ask me anything you want. Yeah. I wore an eye patch for about 1.5 to 2 years while we were trying to figure out a way to get my eye to be able to blink. It was covering my eye because it was exposed all of the time. I was having a lot of damage to my cornea. And so the easiest solution was they were either going to sew my eye shut or I had to keep it covered all the time.
Yeah.
So I chose to wear a pirate patch.
Yeah.
And for my kids, it became normal, although in the beginning it was a little bit unnerving. Yeah. But it became a normal thing. And when I went out in public, I was amazed at the difference of how children reacted versus adults. Many adults pretended not to see it. Yeah. Occasionally someone would compliment me because I bedazzled my eye patches and they were covered with these fun little jewels. And my daughter and I and my kids, we decorated them and tried to embrace it.
Yeah.
And I appreciated when people recognized that, but it was the kids' reactions that I loved. And they would come up to me and ask if I was trying to be a pirate or, oh, cool eye patch. And I remember some kids coming up and they asked me if I had an eye under that eye patch.
Yeah.
And I told them I was like One-Eyed Willie on the Goonies and I didn't have an eye. And I was just teasing and I said, do you want to see? And they said, yes.
Yeah.
And so I had this big dramatic pause moment and then I lifted up my patch and showed them I do have an eye. It just doesn't work very well. And I made instant friends. Yeah. And the kids were very loving and accepting and probably more accepting after they had the chance to talk to me and realized, okay, what's wrong with her face is no different than if I had a broken foot or a bandage on my toe.
Yeah.
I am still the same person on the inside, even if my outside looks a little different.
That has to feel good to get that honesty.
I love it. And I would much rather parents allow their kids to ask than to shush.
Yeah.
And I recognize that we're all trying to find the appropriate ways to show respect and not make an issue of something that we shouldn't. But I think the more honest reactions are probably going to also lead to the best conversations and the most open responses and the most understanding between people. And maybe I know there are others who don't feel that way. And there are some people who don't want to be questioned and don't want to have to talk about it when they're out in public and having interactions at the grocery store. So you kind of have to fill out the situation. But I think most of the time when you see something, especially with kids, let them ask. And for adults, I would say just treat them the same as anyone else. Yeah. Comment the same you would if you were having a conversation with the cashier.
Yeah.
Can you believe these masks?
Yeah.
This is crazy.
Yeah.
Look at the weather. Look at what's going on and have a normal conversation. And that will tell the person that you see them far more than if you try to distance or ignore or not have a conversation.
Yeah. That's amazing. So the audiences that you speak to, I can imagine by the end of the conversation, you've won a ton of friends by being open and being vulnerable. Do you have any examples of people who maybe touched you as much as you touched them through your story?
Oh, how much time do we have? It is why I do what I do. Because in the end, while I can touch them a little bit with sharing my story and hopefully giving them some inspiration and the desire to keep hope going and to keep persevering through their difficult times, the reality is it is others who have given purpose to what I have gone through. And it is by sharing my story and sharing that vulnerability that I have been validated in my life. And my family has been incredibly, incredibly blessed by the people we have been able to meet, the connections we have been able to make, and the relationships that we have. To me, everything in life is about connections and relationships. And the blessing and the true gift of being able to go and speak and share my story is it makes people willing to share their story back. Yeah. They know that their situation is safe with me. And they can open up and tell me things that they haven't ever confided in anyone because they didn't know how it would be received. And suddenly they find a safe place. And they will tell me stories and they will say, I have never told anyone this my whole life, and I'm not sure why I'm telling you. But I just want you to know what I experienced. And that is humbling and powerful and beautiful all at the same time.
Yeah.
When someone realizes they are safe in your care and that perhaps by sharing their experiences, they won't be looked at as less than, but in fact can feel validation and purpose in what they've experienced.
Wow. And I'm guessing that their experiences could have been more or less severe than a brain tumor.
You get everything on the spectrum. And inevitably, someone will come up having been affected by a brain tumor, whether it's my dad died of a brain tumor, or my teacher when I was a little kid, or my neighbor down the street. The statistics will tell you 1 in every 28,000 people is diagnosed with a tumor. Now, 28,000 sounds like a lot, and I think there's no way that that can be right. I know way too many people with tumors to have it be 1 in 28,000, but statistically, that's what it is.
Right.
But what I'm talking about is not really about me or about a brain tumor.
Yeah.
It's about human nature. It's about that desire to know who we are on the inside and to know that who we are is good and good enough and wonderful and has a purpose, and we have an identity even when things don't go the way that maybe we had planned them to go.
Yeah.
Even when our lives don't look the way that we would have mapped out for ourselves, that we still have value and have something to offer and should be seen as whole people.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it resonates, is I'm just honest.
Yeah.
I'm not special. I'm just honest. And I tell people the good, the bad, the hard, the ugly. I'll take them with me through the experiences when I felt like I was in hell, but then I also allow them to see the moments that brought me out and the deep personal touches with humanity that helped me realize what life is really all about.
Yeah.
And I think that's what establishes the connection more than anything.
Now that sounds like a pretty heavy roller coaster to say whatever your plans were are different now, and you still have value, whatever that is, whatever your purpose is on this planet, whatever you're supposed to be accomplishing. So let's go way back. Do you remember what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I do. I remember the things that I was interested in, and I remember the first things that I thought I wanted to be. And let's face it, when you are a child, you know of about 8 careers.
Yeah.
You know about a doctor and a nurse and a lawyer and maybe a banker, a teacher. There are only a few things that you're really exposed to. And I knew the things that I enjoyed, and I knew the things that I had as hobbies. Mm-hmm. And so when I was in 3rd grade, I would have told you I wanted to be an artist.
Okay.
That
because
lasted,
you enjoyed it, or because you were good at
I
it?
think no, not because I was good. Because I enjoyed it. I think I just went through a phase where I enjoyed using color, using my creativity and imagination.
Yeah.
When I was even younger than that, I don't know that I would have verbalized it, but I knew I loved interacting with people. Mm-hmm. I liked to be up in front of people. I liked to be the one in charge when the teacher left the classroom. Yeah. She would ask me to go to the front of the classroom, and I loved to be the one who was in charge of the classroom and making everything go. I even spoke at my preschool graduation when I was 4 years old.
That's awesome.
And
not very many people volunteer for that.
No. And I loved it. I thrived on it. I love making connections with people. And I realized at a young age that when I was in front of people, I could make those connections and I could see how they felt because I could see and feel their reactions. Yeah. And then I could adjust what I was saying or what I was doing to fit what that audience.
What would you call that? Is that like this showman skill? Is that empathy, being able to feel people?
That's a good question. I think it's probably a little bit of everything. I think part of it is I am a person who I experience things and I feel things deeply. Yeah. And my children will tell you what it means. I cry a lot, but it's not necessarily sad tears all the time. Yeah. I cry a lot of happy tears. I think I process emotions at a very deep level. Yeah. Some people are empaths and they can feel other people's energy. I wouldn't say that I'm like that. Yeah. But I definitely recognize facial signs. I can read people well. I can see how they're feeling. I can see when they're holding back. I can see when they're living in the moment and loving it. And I'm able to somehow adjust in order to go where they are.
Yeah.
And when I try to go where they are, then they just want to open up more and more. And sometimes as an audience member, that just might mean they lock eyes with me, or they allow themselves to start to cry or to laugh out loud, like belly laugh hard. And I can feel that. I feel that emotion. And it, you said a roller coaster, and that's what it is. It is a roller coaster. You don't want a presentation to be all heavy.
Yeah. Because
then the feeling in the room just starts to sink and sinks, and the energy slips away. Yeah. So it's like when you read a good book, it's good because it keeps you turning the page because you don't know what's going to happen, and you have high moments and then you have low moments, and it goes back and forth, and you ride that roller coaster, and you get that thrill of emotion, that, you know, the endorphins and the energy rush of going along for the ride.
Feeling good and then feeling sad and then feeling good again. Yeah.
And wanting to just throw your arms up in the air the whole time and enjoy the ride while you're on it. And I think there's something incredibly powerful about being on that ride and being able to help direct that ride, maybe.
That's amazing to me that you knew that. I mean, I don't know that you knew that at that age, but that you recognized that you enjoyed being in front of people, and that led to where we are now.
I recognized that I had either a leaning that way, or at least it was interesting to me that people would react according to how I communicated with them, both verbally as well as in the written word.
Yeah.
So at one point in time, in probably the 7th grade, I would have told you I want to be a writer.
Yeah.
And I would turn in my English assignments and my creative stories, and I would come up with all of these scenarios. And I understood, at least at a basic level, that at the heart of it all, it's about how you make people feel, and it's about that emotion and, you know, falling in love with the characters and then watching them go through something.
And relating to them a little bit.
And relating to who they are. Yeah. And that every person puts themselves in that scenario in some way. Why do we love, you know, everyone from Harry Potter to Belle to, you know, whoever? Yeah. It's because we can't help but put ourselves and imagine what we would be like. And imagine if I found out I was the princess.
Yeah.
Or if I was the one deemed to save the world.
Yeah.
And so when you take people through that process, they want to live it. They want to be able to ride that ride. And I think it's a fun ride to ride along with them.
That's awesome. So junior high, there's some riding experience there. Were you, I mean, girls in school typically aren't, but were you a troublemaker at all, being the center of attention?
No.
Okay.
I was not a troublemaker. I was very, very social. I ran for a student office. So
you knew how to hone that and rein that in a little bit.
I knew how to. Well, I think what I came to realize was I realized that I had this enjoyment and potentially gift or talent that I could practice with communicating with people.
Yeah.
And what I realized was it was far more fulfilling when I was using that for some good.
Yeah.
So it started by, let's run for student office and see if we can do something with my class and if we can do something positive as a school. And I did run for student body president in junior high, and I lost. But it didn't faze me. And I ran again as secretary, and I won. Yeah. And I was thrilled with that and thought it was great. And I loved bringing people from different groups and different cliques, so to speak, together when maybe they wouldn't have come together on their own. But I liked bringing them together and saying, no, I'm not part of this group or this group or this group. I'm part of all of the groups. Yeah. And why don't we all do that? Yeah. And that was a lot of fun, was to bring people together that maybe wouldn't have otherwise come together.
Yeah. That's neat. So you started to experience that, know what that felt like, and make it happen. So through those experiences, what did you end up doing first out of high school or after college or through college? What track did you get on for a career? What was it that you got into?
In high school, I recognized that, yes, I did indeed have some potential in this area. And while I loved everything in high school, honestly, I really just loved learning. Minus maybe biology, which I don't think I ever got. I could not get at the heart of some of the science stuff. Yeah. I could study hard enough till I could still do well in the classes, but I never embraced certain things. I never lived it like some people do. So outside of maybe some of the sciences, I would say I loved everything I learned about. And I loved math, and I loved writing, and I loved English, and anything along those lines. And I realized, okay, I definitely have a propensity in this area.
Yeah.
I loved even studying for the ACT and the exams because we had to do the vocab words.
Yeah.
And I loved learning that. Who else wanted to know what the word bucolic means?
Right.
But I thought it was a lot of fun to learn that you can say precisely what you mean if you find the right word to describe what you're trying to describe.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes when people use slurs or swear or use, inappropriate language, it's because they don't take the time or have the understanding to really hone in on a specific message and care to find the word choice that describes what's going on. So I knew I loved that, and I knew I loved stories, and I knew I wanted to make a difference. So going into college, I chose to do public relations as my major because my understanding of it at that time was that I would be able to use communications and create these master strategic plans and communicate them to the media and to the public to help some greater good.
Sure.
So that was what I went into, not really understanding probably what it involved on a regular basis, but knowing just enough that I thought, yeah, I could totally do this.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. And quickly, as I got into it, I realized, okay, I'm good at this. I can write press releases. I can write campaign stories. I can create this strategy map. But I also knew for me, there had to be a bigger purpose. And
you can't just be selling burgers for a company or trying to sell more flights on an airline or something. It's got to be something important.
Exactly. And getting out of college and graduating and getting my first job, I was just excited to get the first job and to start getting real paychecks.
Right.
It was $13.50 an hour. I was legit.
Yeah.
But I did quickly realize when I got a job in marketing for a high-tech company, I didn't have that personal fulfillment, and I didn't have that intrinsic level of satisfaction at the end of the day when I submitted press releases about technology and layoffs and changes in computers. And now I was only at that job for a year and a half, and then I switched to the nonprofit world, and that is where I found my niche.
So I'm curious, and I know there's probably a statistic out there somewhere, but I'm going to guess that there are a lot of people who, dad was an attorney, so I want to be an attorney, or whatever the situation is, or like with public relations, I think that this is where my strengths are, so that's where I want to go. What would you say the percentage is of people who, whether they finish college or not, whether they finish the degree that they started, whatever the scenario is, how many people do you think get into the career that they thought they wanted and stick with it their whole life? No matter how they feel about it.
I bet there is a statistic out there. I bet it probably also isn't totally accurate because I think people change and evolve as they go on.
Yeah.
But so many kids struggle with the decision of what should I study in school because they feel like they are making this decision that is going to turn them in a direction for the rest of their lives. And while that can be true, I found the truer aspect of it to be whatever it is that you get into, it's when you make connections with people, you reach out to the people who you are around, those professors, those lab attendants, the research assistants.
An influence on, or an impression, that's the word.
And they end up guiding where you end up going in your career far more than just the major that you decide on, the thing that you think that you love, that you want to study. Because few of us understand what we're getting into at the beginning.
100%.
But what we do know is, oh, I see what this person is doing, and that's really exciting to me. Or maybe it's just that makes a really good living and that could provide for my family. Or this is an exciting industry. It's changing a lot and technology is interesting, or biology is interesting, or whatever. I don't think you always really know what you're getting into. And I would probably say to young people, don't stress over it too much. Start with something and you'll figure it out along the way. As you meet people, see what they do and ask for their advice and opinions. And if you don't know what you're good at, have someone else tell you.
Yeah.
The people around you, they know. Yeah. And you don't always stop to ask them, but they know what your talents are and they know the things you enjoy doing versus the things that you don't. They know it because they talk to you and they see your reactions and they see what you get lost doing versus those things that you stumble through and
I think that's
drain you.
Probably less of a aha moment for people who are in high school now, getting into college now. They've seen instability in the workforce. They've seen companies, whether they're tech startups or whatever, just happen. And we're more of a generation where parents or grandparents spent their whole life at that place.
True.
And so I think that's a fantastic word of advice to say, you don't know what you're going to end up doing, and be okay moving, be okay being flexible, not necessarily moving like moving your house, but whatever you're into, be willing to take a risk on it.
And pay as much attention to the people and the guidance of the people around you as you pay to your studies. Don't let your schoolwork get in the way of your education, which sounds like a silly thing to say, but you in the long term are much more than just the classes that you take and the micro set of skills that you develop. And I have heard many times that you can do what you love and have a passion for, or you can love what you do. And I think you have to do a little bit of loving what you do in order to navigate the world that we're in right now, where you may not be able to start your ideal job when you're 21 years old and the world is in flux and the gym you were about to start or the career you were about to go into might suddenly become obsolete.
Yeah.
Or the money you'd saved up to start your restaurant. Well, now you can only have half of the people there. Whatever the situation is, I think there is a big lesson that can be learned from loving what you do, even if you're not necessarily doing your passion, or if you're not passionate about what you're doing. You can still find aspects that you love, and you can still find ways to connect with people and enjoy your work.
I think that's awesome. Looking back at my experience in college that happened way later in life, there were a couple of professors, there were a couple of people who you could say were mentors, but they kind of directed me to where I was, not where I was supposed to be, but what they thought that I would be good at.
And that's not to say you shouldn't do what you're passionate about. That's a very big thing right now, is I got to find my passion and I got to figure out what that is. And from the very start, I have to be doing something I'm passionate about that will make a difference in the world. And I would say all of that can happen, but it may not be all right at the beginning, and it may not be at your very first entry-level job.
Right.
You may not get that big promotion and raise after just a couple of months. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some time. And if you really do want to make a business out of what you're passionate about, you can. There's nothing stopping you these days other than the world changes. And so as long as you're willing to pivot and go along with things as they change, and you're willing to continue to learn and grow and have that growth mindset, then you're going to be good. Because if you have a growth mindset and you're willing to keep learning and keep on that ride, then you'll be able to keep riding it, and you'll go in different directions. And so that's one of the things I love about the world today.
So that's what you've done. You went into PR. You were there for about a year and a half at that particular place.
And I still used all of my PR skills when I switched over to the nonprofit world. And I started working for a nonprofit hospital system. And I loved that and got very into fundraising and campaign management, raising money for good causes. And I realized, hey, this is a combination of my communication skills oral skills as well as written skills in interacting with donors, interacting with big companies, making presentations, helping people who had finances that they had to be able to spend, and helping them connect with good causes that would be, a match for everyone, helping people find that match. I love connecting people with the other right people for them. So I have stayed in that, and I've now been in nonprofits for 22 years and have been a nonprofit consultant for the last 8 years.
That is amazing. And so for people who might have heard nonprofit but don't know, a nonprofit organization still has an operating expense. They still have salaries, right?
Yes.
They just aren't profit to stakeholders or shareholders or something else. They have to spend what they get.
And they don't have stock. They don't, they're not beholden to other stakeholders outside of what their cause is. So they spend all of their money and reinvest it back into their cause. So yes, they still pay their people. They still have an executive director, and they still have employees, and they pay all those employees. But in the end, any profits that they would make, they invest that back into growing their cause or helping their whether it's patients, whether it's customers or clients or cause, whatever their purpose is, they reinvest it back into that purpose.
Awesome. So you can sleep well knowing that what you're doing is making a difference and helping people, and people are getting paid for a salary to take care of their families. That's cool.
And that's where I found the perfect combination of all of my skills came together.
Yeah.
And I love the comic strip creator Scott Adams that does Dilbert, and he's also written a series of books that are so true to life, but they also crack me up at the same time. And he talks about the talent stack, where you take all of your different talents, and maybe not even the things that you're great at, but the things that you're good at or even mediocre at, and you pile them all together and you realize, hey, I have an interest in doing good, and I'm a pretty good communicator, and I'm a pretty good writer, and I can give good presentations, and I know how to read people. And then when you put all of those things together, then you can find the intersection of, wow, here's where I could make the most difference.
Yeah.
As opposed to the 10,000 hour rule where, heck, if you don't figure out what you want to be when you're 4 and start spending those 10,000 hours in one direction, the talent stack idea is more that you figure it out as you go along, and as you discover the things that you're good at, and as you discover the unique talents that you have, and where the combination of those things bring you, as opposed to choose one thing and spend all of your time doing that one thing.
I just finished listening to that book, Outliers, and it was great.
Love Malcolm Gladwell.
But it was depressing a little bit.
Because you realize,
I'm 40 and
I missed the train. It's long since gone, and I'm not on it.
Yeah. But with Scott Adams, and I had read one of his books a few months ago, that lends itself to this idea of a Renaissance soul, someone who can do a wide variety of things, whether you consider them valuable or not. But when you put all of those things together, it shows your genius.
And that is very needed right now, because let's face it, the world is changing so fast that if you had chosen something and started investing in your 10,000 hours, it could be totally obsolete by the time you hit your 10,000 hour mark. With the way that the world is changing, and with the speed at which technology is increasing and jobs are changing. An app developer did not exist 20 years ago. But look at what, thousands and thousands of people are now doing for jobs. And they're not necessarily sitting in offices in the traditional way we would have thought, but they have these talents and skills, and they're able to use it to develop apps or code, program, do all of these things with technology that we couldn't even have told them to take that as a major in school.
We had our dreams because of Star Trek. We had our dreams because of Star Wars. We had these visuals of what these things could be, but we had no clue.
Right. And now I would almost say, don't just choose one specific micro thing unless you know that is your absolute destiny. If you're a ballerina and that's your whole life, go for it. But if you're somewhere in the middle and you have lots of things you like to do and you're not totally sure, that's okay. Embrace that and pick a direction and see where that direction takes you. And I think you'll realize that oftentimes it's starting the journey that really helps you figure things out. You don't always know going into it what you should do.
Starting is probably the hardest, most confusing thing.
Darn it all, isn't it?
Take a step. So, obviously, you have found your good. You know what your worth is. You know how to share that idea with people. But I'm guessing with the physical trials, the things that you've experienced, you haven't always felt that way. And as a human, you probably still have days where you're wondering why you're here and what you're supposed to be doing. For those that are struggling, whether they're struggling with a mental or emotional challenge, or whether they have a physical, any kind of ailment or disability or disfigurement, what would you say to people that feel like there is no good?
I think there are far too many people in the world who are sitting in the corner of their rooms, hiding under the blankets, under the covers on the bed, sitting in the corner, or spending their hours in a dark room playing their video games, just trying to let time pass, who feel like they are absolutely the only ones who are in this situation, who feel like even though there are 7 billion people in the world around them, they feel like they are absolutely alone and forgotten. And lonely, because there is a difference in being alone and feeling lonely. I can be alone and feel perfectly content and happy.
Me too.
Or I can be in a room full of people and feel absolutely lonely and down. And I think one of the things that is important to remember is everyone feels that way at some point in time. And situational depression will impact 100% of the world's population at some time. We will all be susceptible to it because we are human and we have emotions, and life throws stuff at you that you do not expect. And in the last 6 months, how many of us have gone from feeling like 2020 is going to be the best year ever to feeling like the world is ending and we don't know if we want to be part of it anymore. Because it's become a scary and sad and lonely and different place. And we have to remember that many, many other people are having those same feelings and those same emotions. And they are absolutely legitimate. And we shouldn't try and say, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way. You do need to feel it, and it's okay to acknowledge it. I would just say acknowledge it, but don't choose to live there. Acknowledge that you're having a hard time, that you're in a bad place. Don't build your house in that bad place. Don't settle down there. Visit it when the emotion hits and recognize that things are hard, and then recognize that it's temporary. It's going to be something that will last for a little while. Let your emotions run through and choose not to build your house there. Choose to build your house somewhere else.
That's easy to sort of understand or contemplate on something like losing a job or something that's kind of obvious going to be temporary, right? You lost your job. Something will change. Something will happen. You'll find a new job. Everything will be okay. But some things don't feel as temporary. And I think that's those words are, don't build your house there. That assumes that there's some dedication to it.
Well, building a house, building anything requires work and dedication and effort and time and a plan and a series of materials and effort and tools. And yes, you do have to be able to think about it that way. And I think going through these struggles the last several years, I have seen people who have built their houses in negative places and who have made the choice to be upset and be victimized by some of the bad things that have happened. And it's not that it's legitimate that these terrible things happen.
Sure. Your feelings are your feelings. You can't change that.
And sometimes life sucks.
Yeah.
Sometimes bad things happen. And sometimes there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And sometimes you may have been part of that bad thing, and that's part of what's making you feel even worse.
Yeah.
But you can still choose if that's going to be your focus or not. And I have a friend that went through a cancer challenge, and we have commiserated many, many times. And she chose to take a different path and talk about the a-hole doctors and all of the people who were mad and who didn't treat her well enough, and really focus on that.
Yeah.
And I come away from those conversations and I feel like a balloon where all of my air has just been let out, and it sucked all the energy out of me and sucked all the strength out of me. And I realized that even though we'd been through some very similar things, we each got to choose where our focus was. And you can choose to be bitter, or you can choose to be better from it. And you're the one who's up to bat and gets to make that choice.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's going to be easy, and that doesn't mean you're not going to have the days where you're bitter or you're sick or you're mad or something is wrong, and it's not going to mean that it's not legitimate. But you still have to choose what you're going to focus on, and where you focus that energy makes a big difference. The way that I come to think of it is actually something that became a title of my book, because it hit such a chord with me when I had this experience in the hospital that it resonated and became now what is kind of a mantra and motto for my life, which is the sun still shines. And that doesn't mean much if you don't know the story behind it, but I had been in the hospital for a couple of weeks, in and out of the neurocritical care unit. I'd had already a couple of brain surgeries. I had many, many complications, not just the facial paralysis and the hearing loss. I also had a cerebral spinal fluid leak, and I had spinal fluid that was dripping out of my nose and leaking down the back of my throat.
Yeah.
And that is very dangerous and incredibly painful, and can be fatal if it's not caught or if it's not corrected.
Sure.
And the doctors were having a very, very difficult time correcting mine. Sealing a spinal fluid leak can be natural, and your body can do it on its own. But if it doesn't seal on its own, then it can require heavy medical intervention. And in my case, it required additional multiple brain surgeries to go in and physically sew shut the holes in my brain where spinal fluid was leaking out. And I had been in the hospital for a number of weeks, and it was during spring and early summer. It had been raining constantly. I had been so ill, and with the brain tumor and the spinal fluid leak, I was completely bedridden. I couldn't even elevate, because with a spinal fluid leak, when you get out of a laying position and you sit up, the spinal fluid leaks more, and then you have no cushion around your brain.
Yeah.
And it's intensely painful and awful. And I had been on my back in my bed for weeks.
Yeah.
Hadn't been able to eat normally. I was kind of living on IVs. Hadn't gone so much as outside of the neurocritical care unit or the neuro unit at the hospital. And one day my husband came into the room, and he brought a wheelchair, and he said, "Get in. We're getting you out of here." And I was very sick at the time. And so my initial reaction was, I don't think we're allowed. I don't think we're allowed to do this. But he helped me get into the wheelchair, and I had an IV tower that was hooked to me. So we were pulling the IV tower along with me, and we went out of the neurocritical care unit. And then we went down the hall, and we got into the elevator, and we went down to the main floor of the hospital, and we went past the lobby and past the cafeteria, and there was a door that was open at the end of the hall. And I kid you not, I felt like a kid playing hooky in school. I saw that door and I thought,
We're going to get caught.
we're going to get caught. I don't know if I dare do this. And my husband didn't look left. He didn't look right. He just went with full intensity as though he had every bit of permission and he was allowed to do this, and wheeled me and my little big IV tower right out the door. And we went outside of the hospital for the first time in 3+ weeks. And he pulled me up alongside this strip of green grass. And the clouds were in the sky, but it wasn't raining. And all of a sudden, there was a break in the clouds. And a ray of light shone down through the clouds. And I could feel the warmth of the sun on my arms and on my face.
Yeah.
And in my body. And it hit me in that moment. Behind the clouds and the storm, the sun still shines.
Yeah.
Behind the clouds, the sun still shines. No matter what storms you are going through in life, the sun is just as bright and just as powerful as it ever was. And you just have to wait for a break in the clouds.
And those 3 weeks when you're sick might as well be months or years.
Oh, it felt like forever.
Awful.
And I was isolated. My kids sometimes couldn't come to see me. Sometimes they did come to see me and they were frightened.
Yeah.
Mom did not look like the same person. My head was shaved. I was covered in staples. My face was different. My eye would not close.
Yeah.
My 2-year-old would not come to my bedside. He did not recognize his mom.
Yeah.
And that was a painful, difficult place to be. And I needed every little bit of strength and little bit of hope we could find. And so that day of seeing and feeling the sunshine and remembering it was still there, even though my life seemed to be falling apart and I seemed to be isolated and alone in this little bubble inside the neurocritical care unit of the hospital, it was a beautiful, hopeful moment of seeing the bigger picture and realizing that that was just a moment and the sun is going to keep shining no matter how many storms I have to go through to see it again.
Yeah. That's powerful. And we were talking for a second before, it's difficult to understand when someone is dealing with something that is a physical restriction, a physical disability, and a mental disability or a mental issue, an imbalance in brain chemicals can feel the same way, but we're not trying to say that you will feel the same or you will feel better. There are a variety of circumstances that people are going to be experiencing this dark cloud, and sometimes that trite saying the sun is still shining to them is, how dare you say something like this? This is never going away. We're not at all.
And it's almost insulting to say, you think I can just choose? You think I can just choose to be better instead of bitter and that it's all going to change? And I know that is not what I am saying. Yeah. And I am not in any way lessening what someone is going through, because there is a difference between situational depression and clinical diagnosable depression that is usually caused from an imbalance in chemicals, something that's missing from your body, some process that is being shortchanged and isn't happening the way it is supposed to. But that's not to say that someone who is experiencing legitimate clinical depression or bipolar or one of the other, anywhere on the spectrum of mental health issues and mental illness, that's not to say that they don't still have choices to make. Sure. They may not be able to feel better every moment of every day by looking for the sunshine or by just writing in a gratitude journal. But they can find the things that do help them. Yeah. We can learn to identify triggers and things that set us off. When we input the wrong kinds of chemicals into our bodies, it can also then set off a negative series of reactions in our bodies and in our brains. Mm-hmm. And we can choose to to look for the things that help us, the things that do tend to take us to good places, and then try and recognize the things that take us to negative places.
Yeah.
And I do think that that aspect is a choice, even though obviously there are diagnoses and there are things happening in your body that you aren't going to choose and that you wouldn't wish on anyone. And those aren't things that are going to be just made better by looking at the sunshine and by putting a smile on your face. But you do still have some control, even in those worst situations.
Yeah.
You get to control some of your thoughts and patterns and the way that you choose to spend your time and how you choose to focus your energy.
Yeah.
And that hopefully can empower you when you're in those moments to realize you do still have control of something. So take control of what you do have and use it in the best way possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you do just need to escape, and sometimes you can go for a walk. And those are choices. This has been an amazing conversation, an amazing journey to know how you thought life was going to go and how life started to go, and that you figured out a way to direct that. Because in those 3 weeks where the sun isn't shining and it's early spring and it's raining, you're not thinking, I think I need to write a book about my experience.
No. And it's important to note, I had that experience where I went outside and saw the sun and had a very powerful, positive moment. And then I went back inside and I still had another brain surgery. I still had weeks more in intensive care. I still had a brain infection that was almost undiagnosed and almost took my life. And it's not as though things just got better.
Right.
But I do think that that gave me hope. And it helped me to remember that there is still something outside of this place and there is still something to look forward to, even if the moment I'm in right now is overwhelming and seems like it's going to be the end.
Yeah.
There is still something bigger. And I wasn't thinking about, wow, this is going to make a great story one day. I was just trying to survive and get home to my family.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see the faces of my kids and be able to go spend time with my husband and not have to have him have a conversation with his children and say, your mom's not coming home.
Yeah.
Like, I just wanted to go back to the white picket fence life. Yeah. Just normal. That's all I wanted, was just to survive and get back to being a mom and a wife and being able to be stressed about volunteering and doing my job and just the normal things of life. Sure. That's what I was shooting for.
Yeah. And I think that's most parents, right? If anything were to happen, that's their ultimate desire, is to be back there with their family. So I saw a video that you posted the other day through social media where you mentioned this, where there's some trauma in experiencing this change in your appearance, that you know what you look like, and there is some, I'm trying to think of the phrase, disconnect. This isn't me. I have to get familiar with this. I have to get used to this again. And you're in this video, you were talking about how in the coming weeks after this surgery, and then in the coming year or so after that, there's more, that you're going to have to adjust again.
Yes.
To what you look like to yourself.
And I think we all go through this to varying extents as we grow, as we develop, as you go to college and you put on the freshman 15 pounds and all of a sudden you start to change a little bit and you look and you think, oh, that's different. I either have to get used to that or I have to change it and fix it and do something differently. And as we go throughout our lives and as we mature and as we age. In fact, I've told, the story before that I sometimes struggle when I walk by the mirror because I look and I think that person is not the person I think of in my head. Yeah. The person in the mirror isn't who I imagine myself to be. And one day my cute grandma said, I feel that way all the time. I walk by the mirror and I think, who is that old lady? Because in my mind, I am still young and vibrant and honestly, my grandma just passed away about not even 2 months ago. And she really was that way right up until the very end, is that she was still young and vibrant in her attitude and in her personality and in her actions, even when her body started to tell her that she was aging.
Yeah.
But I love that she didn't fully embrace that, because in her mind, she's like, nope, I'm holding on to this energy and I'm holding on to this teenage girl who's living within this body.
That's fun. I was just thinking, jumping on the trampoline as an adult is not the same as jumping on a trampoline as a teenager.
It's not.
And it's depressing.
But I did it the other day and I was proud. I didn't injure anything. And it was sort of fun.
Yeah. So have you done anything to maybe prepare yourself, psych yourself up for this change?
I am doing things every single day, because in the last decade in going through this journey, I have actually had probably at least a dozen surgeries to try and correct or fix or help cope with all of the things that went wrong because of the tumor and because of the side effects and the complications. I have a mechanical spring in my eyelid that helps me to open and close my eye. And it functions a little bit like a safety pin. And if you think about how long a safety pin might last when you're using it all the time, that's exactly what has happened in my eye.
Wow.
And it is a mechanical device and it wears out just like anything else would. And I've had enough procedures done that I can be pretty realistic and understand what things can go right and what things can potentially go wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm trying very, very hard to focus my energy and my effort and my time on things that could go right. My good friend is a psychologist. He's a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Paul Jenkins. And he says you can spend all of the time in the world imagining what's going to happen in the future. And when you imagine the worst case scenario, that is called anxiety.
Yeah.
And I think I, just like everyone else, can get caught up in that, what if this goes wrong?
Yeah.
What if this happens? What if I test positive for COVID right before I'm supposed to get on the plane and then I can't fly and have the surgery and we don't get our deposit money back and I can't have this, it's very easy to fall down the rabbit hole and get stuck in that. So I am very intentionally trying to manage my feelings, my emotions, my expectations, and I'm using affirmations. My husband actually wrote an affirmation and he put it on our mirror. So one of the first things I see every day is this affirmation. And it says that I will have perfect symmetry and functionality in my face. And I am a person who wants to have lots of good things in life. And so I have a list of about 40 affirmations that I do every day. Yeah. And my husband said, right now, you need to focus on one. Put the others aside. Let's just focus on this one thing. And I am doing everything I can to put my physical, mental, spiritual, social, emotional self into preparing. I have bought all kinds of very healthy protein powders and I have put them in individual little packages so that I can, when I'm not able to, I won't be able to eat well after this surgery. And so I've got all of these protein powders and things that are going to be good and help me to stay healthy and keep some nutrition. And I've packaged them all and I've tried them different foods, some banana with it, and trying to make it into a smoothie so that I can know that I can still have the nutrition for my body. I am exercising more than normal so I can try and strengthen my body so that when I'm down, it doesn't atrophy my muscles as much and I don't have as much downtime. I'm actually trying to put on a few pounds so that when I'm not able to eat, that it's not going to have as negative effect on my body. But I think the most important aspects of what I'm doing are the mental and spiritual preparations. Trying to have faith in knowing that I feel very confident that this is what I'm supposed to do, holding to that, remembering it, and putting myself mentally in a good position by doing these affirmations, by listening to positive music, by surrounding myself with good people, by focusing on and reading good material, I'm doing everything I can to put myself in a good situation so that I can handle whatever is to come.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to prepare myself for it. I'm preparing myself for the best possible outcome.
That is awesome. That's inspiring to know that. I mean, we do, right? We think and we put ourselves into a circle or a cycle of what we're thinking. But thinking for positive is the opposite of anxiety. It's almost excitement. It's anticipation. It's knowing that something is going to change.
It's imagining what's going to happen and imagining the best possible outcome instead of the worst.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is a game changer when you realize all of the time we spend talking in our heads and thinking about our lives. When we choose to imagine the worst, we are physically and physiologically putting ourselves in a cycle of anxiety. And when we choose to imagine the best, we are laying a road and foundation for our future.
Yeah. The success of the direction we're going.
Of the direction that we want to go.
Wow. So, Jodi, this has been an amazing conversation, inspiring and emotional. The problems that life will throw at us for whatever reason, the experiences that we have, and how you have chosen to deal with them. And obviously not every single minute of every day is possible, but that you are still hoping and aiming for something that is good. So this is my last question for you today. What does it mean to you to own your good? What advice would you say to somebody who's trying to figure that out for themselves?
There are so many times when we get caught up in what we're doing and we stop seeing the reasons behind why we're doing it. And I would say when you really are at a point where you can own your good, it's when you still have the excitement to do what you're doing and you know exactly why you are doing it. And that could be something as small as I am intentionally complimenting the cashier because I know that she's probably been standing there with the mask on, handling these transactions all day long, and she's exhausted. And maybe the only thing I can do is tell her thank you and compliment her. But if I have the opportunity to change her day a little bit by doing that, then I'm going to do it. And so recognizing the power that you have when you combine your intention with understanding that why of what you're doing allows you in any situation you're in, no matter what it is that you're doing, that you can own it and you can embrace it and you can help what you are doing make a positive difference in the world. You are divine by design. And as soon as you come to figure that out and own it, then you have the multiplier effect where you just grow the good in yourself and you grow the good in the world.
That is awesome. Even as little as it might seem to compliment somebody with the intention of making somebody else feel better or helping somebody else to feel better.
You think about that, the first step in doing that was recognizing the situation that they're in. And what that means is that you've taken attention off of yourself and you're looking at someone else and you're imagining what must it be like to be in their shoes.
Yeah.
And as soon as you make that mental switch from me to seeing the other person, then you are owning the good already because you're seeing someone else and you're imagining what you're going through. And then when you follow through with that and turn that focus and turn it into something positive, then you are fulfilling and you're owning that good and you're helping them to own the good as well.
And then it's just easier to do again.
And again and again.
Recognize that. Jodi, thank you so much.
This has been delightful.
It's been a pleasure to talk with you today. For those of you that have just discovered Own Your Good, I hope that this episode of this podcast has done something for you today. And if it has, I would love it if you would share it with somebody that could use a pick-me-up, something that would help them get through the hard times that they're facing. Thanks for joining me today on Own Your Good. Thank you for joining me today on Own Your Good. I'd like to give a special thanks to Arches Audio. They are the ones that provided this awesome music. If you need anything for a project, I would go and check them out. They have a great selection of music and other services to help you with your creative projects. I hope that you found this valuable. If you enjoyed this episode and it did something for you, or you think somebody might benefit from it, please share this. It would mean a lot to me to help spread this positivity and this idea that people can change, improve, and ultimately own their good.